I'm going to show you a bunch of work quickly, not super quickly, but I want you to see what I do. I want you to see what I've been working on. I certainly want to talk to you more than talk at you. I think when you see some of this stuff, I hope it brings up some questions about what it is, at least that I do for NPR. So, one of the questions I always get asked is, and I've used this 1,000 times, so bear with me, is how you get pictures on the radio. And my answer used to be, you have to listen really carefully. As we've expanded, we have a larger and larger audience that's online, and certainly overseas. Most of our listeners and and viewers come from the website. So the website is audience-wise catching up with our radio audience. So I produced this for an internal. I'm going to show you a video, but it was produced for an internal sort of tour that we had in Washington when people were visiting our new headquarters. It's not necessarily about migration. Some of this stuff isn't directly tied to, for example, what was going on this summer in Europe. We'll get to that later in what we're going to talk about, but this gives you a pretty good idea and a feel for what I do at NPR. So I'm going to wait to start this until the lights are dim.
You are constantly hyper-aware that you are in a really, really, really dangerous place. And you're looking for, okay, if this gets any worse, can I get out to the left? Can I get out to the right? Can I move back to where I came from? Reporting in general, you can do sort of after-action reporting and tell a story and reassemble a story that's already happened, especially in a conflict zone. But as a photographer, you don't get that choice. You have to be there, and in most cases, you have to be in the middle of it. Like most listeners, you are allowed to imagine what the environment is, where the story's coming from, in some far-flung location somewhere in the world. I ultimately want my images to be up to the level and to the quality that an NPR story is. I don't want someone to listen to an amazing story and then see the pictures and be disappointed. I want them to be just as amazed when they go online to look at the photographs as they were when they heard the story. I wanted to add something to that. I wanted to give people the ability to see what they were hearing, complement the story.
Just an hour before, the presidential helicopter landed in a nearby pasture where a sacrificial bull was waiting for him, fresh blood flowing from a neck neatly sliced. When candidate Karzai stepped out of the helicopter, he rushed by in a cloud of dust and security, arm in arm with the sponsor of this rally, Mansour Naderi. Mansour Naderi leads a small political party, but much more to the point, he's the revered leader of a minority Shiite sect, the Ismailis, who have called this Cayenne Valley home for centuries. What you're hearing now is how Ismailis greet their religious leader. Mansour Naderi passes through the throngs, his hands raised in a kind of blessing, and his followers reach a near hysteric pitch, trying to touch him, kiss his ring, simply get close. Even women press forward aggressively, most in brightly colored veils and glittery dresses, but the few in burqas have thrown them off their faces to get a better look.
All of the stories that I've worked on have been with reporters, but mainly in Afghanistan, I'm given leniency to to produce independent pieces on my own. Those tend to be nat sound pieces where the interviewees are the ones telling the story, and then I line the pictures up to the audio line. I spend a lot of time embedded, but I am certainly carrying way less of a load than the Marines or the young Army guys. So my advantage is that I'm not carrying 75 to 95 pounds of gear on my back. Mine's only about 40 pounds. So it's a age equalizer. You know, physically it's demanding, and I think even more so, it's mentally, it's tough because you have to walk through some really, really difficult things and see some really horrible things that happen to people. It's a lot easier when you're taking pictures. You know, when you're in the middle of it, you're concentrating on doing your job and you're thinking about the things that you need to do to be safe. You know, we have amazing teams of reporters that are covering Afghanistan, from the Pentagon to the Hill to the White House. It's a very different thing, you know, when you spend time over there with the Army or the Marines and you see what's going on and you come back and then you hear the talk here. It's really two different worlds, and it's ultimately extremely important to remind people that 60,000, 80,000, we want to send 20 more thousand. Those numbers, those are people, and they have faces.
We're here to talk about migration and people coming and going. People don't just come and go because they feel like it. You know, I mean, what you just saw in Afghanistan, some of the people coming this summer across through Greece and up through Europe were from Afghanistan. It's because of the war that continues there. One of the big things I wanted to bring up, though, is a lot of people move within their own countries. So I'm going to show you a video it bounces between what happened in Haiti with the earthquake and what happened in Japan with the tsunami, because it displaced millions of people in each case. So most of those people never go back to where they came from. They're internally displaced. So let me show you this. It's set to some music. I guess I'll give you a PG warning, so it's got some drawing.
All around me are familiar faces, worn out places, worn out faces, bright and early for the daily races, going nowhere, going nowhere. Their tears are filling up their glasses, no expression, no expression. Hide my head, I wanna drown my sorrow. No tomorrow, no tomorrow. And I find it kind of funny, I find it kind of sad. The dreams in which I'm dying are the best I've ever had. I find it hard to tell you, I find it hard to take. When people run in circles, it's a very, very mad world. Mad world. Children waiting for the day they feel good. Happy birthday, happy birthday. And I feel the way that listen. Went to school and I was very nervous. No one knew me, no one knew me. Hello teacher, tell me what's my lesson. Look right through me, look right through me. And I find it kind of funny, I find it kind of sad. The dreams in which I'm dying are the best I've ever had. I find it hard to tell you, I find it hard to take. The people run in circles, it's a very, very mad world. Mad world. Enlarging your world. Mad
Staying on this why people move, one of the other reasons that they'll move within a country, and I'm keeping this simple for a reason because, again, I want to talk to you about this and hear your questions when we're done showing the materials, but it's financial. And people will pick up and move within a country, move across borders, move across continents if the financial gain is there. That could be for oil. In the case that I'm about to show you, it's for gold. But as always, when greed and finances and money is involved, sometimes everything goes out the window for safety. So this is a story we worked on in northern Nigeria on gold mining, and thousands of people had moved up to this area near Kano, which is a Muslim area in the north of Nigeria. And what they failed to sort of take into account as they were doing this really rough gold mining was, that it was laced with lead, and they were, essentially, it was a Flint situation. So this is a video that we produced, I think it was not last year, but the year before.
The illegal gold mines stretch across a wide swath of northwestern Nigeria. Some of them are open pit mines. Others are networks of narrow tunnels and shafts that burrow into rock outcroppings. The gold mines have brought a source of income to families that were surviving almost entirely off subsistence agriculture. But with the cash came a mysterious disease. Children started convulsing and dying. Thousands more became sick. Some suffered severe neurological damage and can no longer walk, talk, or feed themselves. The problem is the deposits of gold here are buried with lethal amounts of lead. Miners use simple tools to unearth what has become for them a mixed blessing. At processing sites like this, men pound the raw ore with metal clubs. It's during this pounding and grinding that lead is released into the air. Before local kids started dying from lead poisoning, miners did much of this dusty gold processing inside their homes. Ivan Gayton is the head of mission for Doctors Without Borders in Nigeria, which has been trying to treat the kids who are most affected by lead.
The problem is essentially that children eat dirt, and when they have dirt that's contaminated with lead from mine tailings, they eat that and absorb it.
Children run over fields contaminated with lead. They kick up lead-laden dust when they wrestle in the streets. But Gayton says his teams aren't yet treating the kids in some places because they're waiting for the lead to be cleaned up first.
There's absolutely no point in removing the lead from the blood of a child if they continue to ingest it. We can't even get it out as fast as they're taking it in.
The Begega gold mine has been operating for about 6 years, and miners here say it's their only opportunity to earn money. Each of these grain bags of raw ore will produce a small lump of gold. A nugget like this is worth about $30. There have been some efforts to minimize the amount of lead released during the processing, This new site in the town of Anka was set up by a group of Chinese mineral buyers. It uses water in the crushing process to cut down on the dust and increase the yield of gold. Abdullah Lakoja, a local businessman who helped the Chinese establish the site, says this is finally bringing industry to this neglected part of the country.
This is the only factory we have in Anka local government. For now, we don't know what will come tomorrow.
But there's been an extremely high cost here for this modest development.
All these reasons why people move. I think as for me, as a journalist, that is a very important story to tell. I think it almost got lost this summer with what was happening in Europe. You know, it was just this, all the journalists went charging off to Greece and to Turkey, and they were mainly focused on the boats coming across. And then what was happening at the Bulgarian border or the Macedonian border, and we sort of forgot, you know, they stayed, and they ended up places, and they're still there. They're not on the borders, they're actually in Germany, they're in the Nordic countries. Some of them are in the United States. So I'm going to show you a bunch of slides. The first 20, 25 pictures are from Germany. We went to Berlin and then to some villages outside of Germany to see what was happening with the refugees once they actually made it to where they wanted to go. So it was kind of a different look at, instead of just going where the crisis was happening, we took it a step further and sort of looked at it, well, what happens once you're here. I'm not going to really talk through it that much, and then I'll explain the other half of this is we spent a week in Toledo, Ohio with a Syrian family that was resettled there. So I know the students today went up to Erie, and Erie is a place where a lot of refugees have settled. So is Toledo, Ohio. Random places, but you know, welcome to America. So let's hope this works. So this is as they're being processed to get seeking asylum in Berlin. These are mainly Iraqi and Syrian refugees. Migrants. I'm confused what terminology is which anyways. We can use either. So once they are intaked and they're processed, they're sent out to these villages where they have to wait for up to 2 years to be processed in as, you know, for lack of a better term, they get their green card. So this was an apartment complex where a lot of the migrants and refugees were staying. And this could literally be 2 years of sort of doing nothing but smoking cigarettes and drinking tea every day, waiting for their paperwork. So this is in Toledo, Ohio, and it's a family that had just arrived from Syria. And the thing I kind of want you to think about, and I certainly want some, hopefully, questions about it, unimaginably hard to be thrown down in a country like the United States, which is, seems, as we speak English, they don't speak a word of it, except enough to buy cigarettes, and have to restart their lives. This particular family had spent 4 years in a refugee camp in Jordan waiting for asylum in the United States, which they got. So it's a happy story, if you ask me, because it's a family who's going to make it and do something with themselves here in the U.S., but incredibly difficult and unimaginably hard to think what they were going to go through as they adjusted to their new lives. Probably won't stay in Toledo, Ohio, but for the moment, that's where they are. It was heartwarming, but also heartbreaking. They left big chunks of their family behind due to the generosity of a lot of charities in Toledo. They gave them furniture and helped them move in, but it's, I just tried to put myself in their shoes and think of how incredibly difficult it would be to be thrown down in a country and try to make a go of it. I mean, it's exceptional. That's the only way I can think of it. I'm a little wonky up here, so bear with, because I did just get home from Sudan, and I went to South Sudan, pardon me. Big difference. I want to show you some of the pictures that I worked on while I was there. There was 2 main stories that we were working on. One was just the state of affairs in South Sudan, post-Civil War, post-war with the North, and certainly 2011, post being independent and the newest nation in the world. And the other story we were working on was in embed with Médecins Sans Frontières, which is Doctors Without Borders out of France. So I put together a collection of photos. They're all taken in the same area, which is Bentiu, which is in the north of Sudan, up towards the border with it's in the north of South Sudan, with the border of Sudan proper. So, it's a country that's been at war for decades. When they got their independence, it went well for a little while, and then it was essentially a civil war. The camps they've set up are called POCs, Protection of Civilian Camps. So you have literally millions of people that are living in these camps where they are protected by the UN from either rebel forces or government forces, depending where you are and what tribe you're from. So let me get this going. It was a very impressive trip. We can kill the lights. Dusty, it's the dry season. This is in the main camp. So every day are these queues for food, supplies. This is in the town of Bentiu, which is destroyed, but has these sort of roving gangs of kids they're not gangs, they're packs of kids that are sort of running around, kind of wild, for lack of a better term. But once again, this is internally displaced people. They have nowhere to go within their own country. So Doctors Without Borders is a very impressive organization. They're running the only hospital for the 125, 130,000 people that are there. And everything that comes in is flown in because there's no way to drive it to the location they're at. The only way to get around is by Jeep. And they're the ones, they're building a, if you want to call it a hospital, a makeshift tent hospital with 300 beds, I believe. So 300 beds for 125,000 people is a pretty tough equation to deal with. So the pictures you're looking at are the people waiting to go in, and then the doctors doing what they can for the patients. It's mainly malaria, different fever diseases, and malnutrition that they have to deal with on a regular basis. They've just signed a new peace agreement, so it's it'll be within the next year. We'll see if that holds and if people can start moving out of the camps and back to their villages and their homes. South Sudan is also a landlocked country, so there's really nowhere to go cross borders for them to escape what's going on. We followed this little girl who, you'll see her again in a minute, but was desperately ill with cerebral malaria. And then we followed a couple of the doctors. So that was what will eventually be a long-term half-hour podcast, a month and a half from now. That's the same little girl who ended up, by the time we had left, she had died. The numbers in Africa are staggering. I think what they were talking about, that they reached the 100,000 mark of migrants and refugees coming up through Europe this year. That's literally sort of a drop in the bucket compared to the migrations and internal movements within the continent of Africa, people moving around. It's remarkable, the resiliency of the people under these conditions to actually sort of continue living. So that's the end of the pictures.
When you're in the planning process, how do you work with your colleagues in other forms of journalism? You know, you'll have a radio piece, of course, and film components, and you know, how do you work with others through your job to tell the story for all the different ways that NPR works?
So, for example, on this latest trip to Sudan, if there was 3 people on the trip: myself, Kelly McEvers, the host out of Los Angeles, and Jason Bovian, our global health correspondent. So it's kind of easy for me because I can talk to each one of them and find out what they're doing each day. And sort of, they would go in separate directions. One would go to the camp, you know, out into the POC. I would follow them for the morning, and then I would spend the afternoon with the other one inside the hospital. And eventually, as the story took shape, I knew they were going to follow this one little girl. I knew they were going to follow Dr. A and Dr. B. You know, one was from Toronto, the other from Holland. And so I'm able, the hard thing about being a photographer and working with the radio reporters is, unlike in the print medium, you can take pictures during an interview. You can take pictures while you're walking around. You're not disturbing the reporter, even if they're recording it, because they're not going to use that. You can't do that working with a reporter at NPR. I mean, you need to be quiet. So you work out ways of working together, doing the same thing at different times so that, you know, you can each get your job done. It's kind of interesting because audio and photography are essentially the same thing. If the reporter wants the noise of the door closing, I want a picture of the door closing. If the reporter wants audio of the race car going by, I want pictures of the race car going by. Whatever it is, if it's attractive in an audio sense, it's usually attractive in a visual sense. So it's just a matter of working together in a way that we can each do our job. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yes?
Are there ever any challenges that you had to overcome while going on missions like this?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Were there ever any challenges that you overcame while going on like different adventures or missions?
How do you mean?
Was there ever a point that seemed really difficult, but then you overcame it?
Yeah, I think all of these, I mean, so the question is, what are the challenges when we go to do an assignment like this? And what do we have to overcome to do that? I mean, it's just, for me, it's the travel. We're expected to move, you know, as quickly as possible to get to the story, complete the story, and then get back. So, for example, on this trip to Sudan, you're talking about an overnight flight from the U.S. to Europe. In my case, well, an overnight flight I went to the Middle East, to Qatar, an overnight flight to Nairobi, and 3 more days, so 5 total days of travel just to get started on the assignment. And then you need to hit the ground running. So overcoming jet lag, overcoming the travel obstacles, overcoming the visa issues, bringing tens of thousands of dollars with you to pay for the stuff that you're going to need to pay for when you're there. There's no credit cards, so we're carrying huge sums of money. You know, those are the challenges in this situation. And some of the ones that you saw earlier, like Afghanistan or Iraq, or where things are a little more violent, the challenge is to keep yourself in a position where you're not going to get shot, or you're not going to get somebody else shot. That's what I worry about the most, that I would make a mistake that would endanger the lives of the guys that you're taking pictures of. I mean, that's something I wouldn't be able to, I'm not sure, handle if a mistake that I made got somebody else hurt. And I also feel that way when I'm working with our reporters. I want them to, I don't want our reporters to ever come back and say, well, the photographer was a pain in the ass, you know, which is easy because we make a lot of noise and we get in the way and we're up front. So, you know, you just want, yeah, I mean, I think when you ask about challenges, there's this 80% of what we do is logistics. And can you surmount all those logistics to get done the little bit of work you're going to do to produce what is going to be the piece at the end of the day? So I find that's really the hard part. Yes?
You said you work, or have to work really quickly. How would you say, what steps do you go through to kind of make yourself feel comfortable and kind of assimilate yourself with it enough to get the kind of finish shot that you get?
It's time spent. The more time you can spend, I'll give you two examples. I'm going to use Sudan again. Look, you can't just walk into... Oh, sorry. The question is how do we get our subjects to feel comfortable with us being around so that they're at ease and the stuff is candid and it's not set up or we're just shooting portraits. And it's really as simple. It's how much time can you spend with them before you start working. So in Sudan, you know, the doctors were all like, oh, okay, you know, photographer, radio reporters, microphones, cameras, this isn't normal, this isn't right. A day went by, 2 days went by, I didn't really get anything done. 3 days went by and they were kind of like, hey man, you want to go on rounds with me this morning? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And all of a sudden the doors opened up and you're able, you know, you've been welcomed into their world by sort of the time you spent with them, getting to know them instead of working. So the more time you can spend with your subjects before you need to either photograph them or interview them, the more candid it's going to be. I'll tell you in the case of war, it's simple. The minute you go out with them and you get shot at or blown up, you're in. They're good with you. You know, they're like, oh, okay, so you ran the right way, you jumped over the wall, you helped carry the wounded, you know, because that is part of the deal when you sign up for this stuff is you are there and look, if somebody gets hurt, I'm going to help. I'm not going to just take pictures of it. So it's, I think it's, again, it's a time thing. It's the more time you can spend with someone, the more comfortable they're going to be with you and on a level that is going to allow you to have that personal access to their lives. Yes?
You began your career in not working for a radio station.
Correct.
Right, newspapers. How has your career, evolved? How has your work changed? How has the way that you work changed? As you're still a photographer, then the way that you deliver your pictures might be different now. You know, do you approach your work differently? I guess maybe for the students in the room who are, you know, approaching graduating college and then finding their path. How has your path changed, or how have you worked differently throughout your career to get to where you can be in that war zone and be comfortable with those people, but, you know, at the same time still be a good worker? I guess, how have you changed as a photographer from the beginning until now?
I think just each time, with each experience, you gain the experience to do the next one better. Does that make sense? So the first time I went to war, I couldn't believe I was in war, and I couldn't believe somebody was shooting at us, and I couldn't believe that we were tearing along, and believe it or not, this was during Bosnia. So, you know, and it was Kosovo, and I was just overwhelmed by the whole thing, and my pictures sucked. I mean, they did, because I didn't understand. I just thought you went to something like the exodus of the refugees coming across the Albanian border, and you just took pictures and it was good to go, and all you had to do was show up in a foreign assignment, and that was it. It was magic, right? Well, with that experience, now I realize that you have to take this big picture and whittle it down into a little tiny thing that tells the bigger story. And by concentrating and weeding through, a lot of what, in my case, I mean, for an audio, for our reporters, can be a noisy, cluttery situation. For me, it's a visually cluttered, in concentrating and getting in and focusing on something, you're better able to tell the story. Does that make sense? And that just comes from years of doing it. There's an arc of that, of getting that experience to know when you go into a crazy situation. I mean, I can tell you one of the craziest places I've ever been still is Haiti. And having to make sense of an earthquake with a riot, with a gunfight, with a knife fight, I mean, it was like, I'm not kidding, all those things were going on at one time. And which do you choose? How do you stay safe? How are you going to, get out of this situation? Because at the end of the day, I remember an editor told me once, he said, I came in late from a sporting assignment or whatever it was. This was when I was at a newspaper. And he said, that's great, that's a really nice picture. And I said, yeah. And he goes, too bad it's not going in the paper because you're late. And I thought, well, what do you mean? He goes, I would have rather have had the bad picture on time, and we could have got it in the paper, than the good picture that we're never going to use. And I always remember that now when I'm doing work. It's like at some point you have to walk away and get the other part of your job done, which is to move the stuff through the system. So, does that answer the question? I know I got off on a tangent there.
Thank you.
Yes?
A lot of these photos are not just striking, but beautiful even, and I'm not sure this question is possible to answer, but what do you think the role of beauty is in these war zones? I mean, do you attempt to or some of your photos deliberately taken with an eye to attracting your audience in an aesthetic way to get them to pay attention, or is it just you have an aesthetic and that goes along with the story and it's not that deliberate? I know that's kind of convoluted, but
I think if you can capture, so the question is yes, both. I have an eye for light and shadow and detail of the way things, I think that's my It's left brain, right? Is that what Archie said? The left brain thing going. But I also think if you can arrest someone with a photograph, be it because it's beautiful even though it's war, or in a war zone, that's going to stop and make them look at it. It's going to stop and make them read it. It might make them stop and listen to it. If you can do something that's striking visually, you know, I mean, I truly believe this, and I'm just repeating what a million people have said before me, but a picture's worth 1,000 words. And if you can do that picture in a way that makes someone go, huh, well that's interesting, and pay attention where they wouldn't have, then that's the goal, at least for me. But there's the left brain thing too. So, yes.
So, I think we're living in a moment that's extremely xenophobic, extremely prejudiced, and I'm wondering, how do you think your work of photographing groups of people who are being highly stigmatized in the U.S., especially right now, how do you think your work plays into that dynamic or challenges that dynamic?
Can you be a little more specific?
Well, the thing that comes to my mind right now is Donald Trump's been saying we should not, we should bar our country's borders to Muslims. So how does you go into places like photographing Syrian refugees who are, the object of that prejudice oftentimes?
It's interesting because the White House tweeted out all of our photos from the Toledo story that you saw, the Syrian refugees in Ohio. So, I don't know. I can't believe the things we're hearing that are coming out of people's mouths right now. That's, I guess, just the climate that we're in. I certainly don't think about it when I go to do my work. I would never. Look, everybody has a right to make a life in this country, and that's the way I look at it. And if somebody wants to make it a political issue, I think I'm not going to listen to it, and I'm certainly not going to let it affect my work. As far as I still want to this year see how many people they let into the U.S. I want to see where they go in the U.S., and I want to see if they're welcome here in the U.S. So it's certainly a story I want to continue to follow, despite somebody's attempt at political gains from it. Yeah. Yes.
You entered the profession in an analog age, in the 90s, and pictures were on newspapers perhaps, and the equipment might have been analog. Now we're in a digital world where, it's a whole different kind of interface between your equipment, the image, and the audience. How does that impact your work, and how do you think, has that been better, is it more challenging?
I think it's better. I think it's more instantaneous. The ability, I remember I went as an assistant for Sports Illustrated to the Olympics in Seoul, South Korea, and it was the first time they had used a machine called, Cheryl, Leafax? A Leafax. And it was this machine that you didn't have to make a print. You could just put the negative in this Leafax machine, and in 40 minutes you had a color photograph, and everybody was like, man, we can move 10 pictures a day now. I was like, wow, that's really something, because Sports Illustrated was sending bags of film back to New York, and that was part of my job. I would go take the film to the airport, and the courier would take it off to New York and whatever. But I think it's both good and it's bad. It hasn't changed what my ethics are one bit. I don't set up pictures. I try to be honest. I am honest about what I'm doing as a journalist. The fact that it's either digital or film, regardless of that, a journalist is a journalist, and you have to abide by the code of being a journalist. that's that. But I think it's great, for example, I'm going to use Haiti again, that we were able to instantaneously, because we got down there very quickly,